Well, good morning, folks. We're back with another card review for Alterac Valley. And this one, I think we've got some more insanely cool mid-range and control cards. It seems to be a theme. A lot of like slow control cards coming out, which I love. I would die for those to work, but I'm worried, as you'll see. So let's kick it off here with Calar the Ice Lord, a new 10 mana neutral elemental. He's a big ol' 8/8 with Rush and Wind Fury. And he costs 5 less if you have 15 health or less. So if you're getting punched down by an aggro deck on turn 5, you might be able to drop a Calar, maybe with some other discounts baked in there. Who knows? Maybe even sooner, but usually you'd expect about a turn 5 play here for Calar. And he's a big old 8/8, so you'll be able to take a trade on board, maybe kill a couple of your opponent's smaller minions while stabilizing this threat that can either take another trade in the future or maybe just, punch face for 16. Now, I mean, that's a cool idea in theory, like this stabilizer that drops a threat, trade in a little and get ready to pop your opponents. But there's actually some archetype fit concerns there. So it's like a control deck might just rather, not have to rely on the sort of 15 health thing. They might be healing along the way or gaining armor. So then Calar becomes like a 10 mana play where he's far less exciting. If you're running a more mid-range deck where you almost want to use this as a sort of threat, by the time you kind of try to trade it in to stabilize a little bit, it's maybe only going to have 2 health. If this kills a couple 3/3s, then it gets cleaned up really easily. So you might almost prefer something else that has a little bit more resiliency or disruption to your opponent's plays, because this won't really be the most efficient way to swing against small boards in the mid game. Plus, of course, there's just this conditionality where it might get totally stuck. If you happen to be at 16 health on turn 5, it's like, oh, great, okay. So for most decks, there's just all these little things you got to kind of solve for this card that make it really tough. Now, that said, I think there are some decks that are a really natural fit. We've got Quest, Handlock, Warlocky stuff going on right now where they're naturally damaging themselves anyway to advance Quest, and this becomes just a really nice threat for that deck where they're not going to have a lot of trouble getting down to 15 or less and maybe even recovering afterwards. So I think this is the kind of card that's like, okay, Quest Warlock loves this. Maybe there's a couple other decks out there where it's a perfect fit because it is just so much for 5 mana. And so threatening with Wind Fury, a lot of decks will really appreciate that in particular. So I'm not condemning this card. I just, for most use cases, I think it's actually kind of awkward because sometimes it's just going to be a 10 mana card that's far too slow to be impactful. Other times, even when it is a 5 mana card, I don't know that it's really going to fit board states or scenarios all that well. So Calar is, I think, a good card just because there are a couple of those decks that'll love it, but not the sort of, across the class neutral legendary that you'd just expect a ton of people to run. I think it's got some real limitations to consider. So moving on here to Baron Glacier. This is the most ridiculous name ever. He's a Baron and he's a Baron. We saw this one teased, of course, pre-expansion. I already did a video on this one, but it's a 7 mana 6/6 elemental. Battlecry for each frost spell you've cast this game. Summon a 3/4 elemental that freezes. And as we talked about in our previous video, I won't spend too much time on this one. There's literally 0 frost spells in Shaman right now in Standard. Some of you seem to think Frost Shock is, but it actually rotated as a part of the core set. There are 0 that we've seen. So what that means, of course, is that, some can get printed, obviously. They might just print some frost spells for Shaman. I'm going to pull up the thing because people don't seem to believe this. So here's the card library, right? Shaman, Frost, 0 standard cards. Even Wild, I mean, there's not that many. Honestly, there's just not that much Frost stuff in Shaman. So, obviously, Blizzard's going to have to print some Frost spells or some other mechanism to generate Frost spells if they want Baron Glacier to be good, because otherwise he just does nothing. He's just 6/6. Now, the problem, of course, is how many of those can you reasonably print in one expansion, even if every other Shaman card is a Frost spell. They all kind of have to be good. They have to work together. And then I'm still not sure this payoff is all that amazing. It's just a wide board builder. We've seen Kargath, the Watchtower guy, got a little bit of play early in Barons before the Watchtowers got nerfed. So it's not impossible for cards like this to make sense, but it's just got a big challenge to overcome because you got to get good Frost spells printed. You've got to have played enough to make this compelling by the time you get to turn 7. And then, you know, some decks just won't care. Just Flame Strike and move on, basically. And I know Flame Strike's not played, but that's kind of the point. There's better removal out there even than Flame Strike. So all in all, it's just, I just don't see how this one gets there based on current Hearthstone. Now, a year in the future, could they print a lot of Frost Spells and really support Baron Glacier? Yes, I think, you know, give us a year, another core set rotation, Baron Glacier might have a lot more opportunity. That said, I still don't think the payoff is high enough for this card to do anything meaningful. Even if you satisfy all those Frost concerns, I don't know that this board build is significant enough to matter. All right, so moving on here to Korea Fell Soul, and my apologies for the art quality on this one. This is hot off the presses, so no high-res version yet. She's a 6-mana 6/6 legendary for Demon Hunter, and Battlecry, transform into a 6/6 copy of a demon in your deck. So I guess the idea here is, you know, you have some demon with a really cool effect in your deck. This gives you the opportunity to maybe cheat it out a little sooner than you might otherwise be able to. If it's like, you know, Pit Commander that's 9 mana, Korea, you can get a 6 mana Pit Commander. Or alternatively, she just allows you to get an extra version of a given effect, even if it's not like cheating it out necessarily. You might just be able to get a bonus version of whatever kind of cool thing it is you're looking for. I think a combination of those two is really the hot spot for this one. So exactly like Pit Commanders or Ancient Void Hounds, where you like both the effect and, you know, getting that out sooner is a big deal. I think Pit Commander is probably the best version of this, because that gets you a 6-mana Pit Commander, more or less, that summons you another big thing, like maybe a Pit Commander. So this is more support for a big Demon Hunter, and we're gonna have some even more of that later in this video. And that's cool. The challenges here is, you know, this is still a 6-mana option, and that's getting towards the late game. Big Demon Hunter already had some 6-mana support with a card that would summon the minion from hand. So this is a little bit competitive there from a mana cost standpoint. And also, this doesn't really shore up the weaknesses of that deck, which is, you know, getting things down, I think, sooner and quicker and stabilizing earlier. I mean, this gets it down a little sooner at 6 mana than like 9 mana, but it's still, you know, after mini games have already started to be decided and opponents are really working towards their win conditions, you're kind of just playing, you know, a 6-mana thing, and it might be good, but not great. And on top of that, you've also got some consistency issues because, for instance, if you really want to hit Pit Commanders, and that's your best role, that means you can only have a Pit Commander in the deck. Any other demons that are in there may not be as good. That might hurt the consistency of this. Like, I think, you know, an Ancient Void Hound or an Illidari Inquisitor, while both okay, probably aren't quite as good as something like that Pit Commander. So you've got some consistency and low roll potential depending on how you build your deck. So there's some construction things to keep this in check. I think, you know, 6 mana is not that really exciting mana to cheat things out. If we think about back in the day, you know, like Barnes or whatever, you know, you want things cheated out sooner in a game, so they're more likely to make an impact. Now, this being a 6/6 is both good and bad, right? If it just transformed into a Pit Commander, that'd be awesome. That does mean this has some potential to like take a small demon in your deck with a positive effect and bump up its stats, essentially. I think that's going to be a far less relevant use case for Korea. I think she's going to be far more focused on, you know, cheating out big, crazy effects. Hopefully we'll get some more like just really decisive, almost game-winning sort of effects and demons that we'd like to cheat out. Right now, I think it's like Pit Commander, Illidari, Moarg, all those ones we see in Big Demon Hunter lists already. So she's just another kind of cog in that deck that doesn't, to me, really advance it to the next level or improve it. I think kind of the same will be said for a future card in this video. So I have some major questions around Korea's impact. I think adding a little bit of a good fit card to a mediocre at best deck is not really going to do enough to get it there. Maybe we'll hit a critical mass of these sorts of cards to make Big Demon Hunter finally get over the hump. I certainly hope so. I just don't see this card driving that. So next up here, we have the Spammy Arcanist, a cool card. 5 mana 3/4 neutral epic. Battlecry, deal 1 damage to all other minions. If any die, repeat this. So if that sounds familiar, that's because that's the card text for Defile, one of the most beloved Hearthstone cards of all time, I think. People absolutely love Defile because, you know, skill testing, strong removal, felt cool to both see it played against you and play against it. It's just like decision points everywhere. So it's coming back as Arcanist, and Defile was really, really good in its era, like a very, very cheap, powerful, efficient removal tool. So there's some natural inclination to believe that Spammy Arcanist might also be pretty good. Unfortunately, I think the fact that you bump this up to 5 mana really limits the use cases for the Spammy Arcanist. I'm not saying she'll have 0 use cases because Defile was just so good, and I think actually still gets played in wild format even. But a big part of that is that it's a 2 mana card. And yes, you know, you're getting a 3 mana 3/4 attached to this Defile, and that's okay, but you can't play this on turn 2, right? You can't play this on turn 3 or 4 either. On those turns, that's where Defile really shines because it helps answer those really aggressive starts. Your opponent plays a 2/1 pirate, a 2/2 pirate, and a 3/3 pirate, and you happily play Defile on turn 3 and wipe those out. You can't do that with the Arcanist. It's got to catch up from a much later point, which means it's going to be a lot harder to stabilize. And when it does, you might rather spend that 3 mana on something, really anything other than just a 3/4 being attached to your Defile. You know, you might rather use that on some healing or some card draw. The 3/4 itself doesn't really offer a lot of value for decks that are trying to initiate some other sort of game plan or stabilize in a more compelling way than just a 3/4 on board. Like, yeah, okay, maybe it takes a little trade in the future, but I'd probably just rather have some healing or something else that advances my own directive. So the kind of minion body tax on the Spammy Arcanist here, it feels like it might be a little too much. I'm sure there will still be some deck that needs this kind of answer even in the mid game. It's, you know, there's certain metas and board states and things that'll line up better for this than others. So I don't want to condemn this card altogether because, again, the Defile effect can just be really, really powerful. But I don't think this will get anywhere near Defile power levels, essentially, because it's just got that base cost that's so much higher. Moving on here to the Grim Totem Bounty Hunter, and this one has a translated name, so this may not be the final name. It's a 3 mana 4/2 neutral epic battle cry. Destroy an enemy legendary minion. So this is the same effect as like Rind Blackhand from way back in Blackrock Mountain, but it's like 3 mana instead of 7 or whatever that card is. I don't know. Much cheaper. I think it's actually kind of intriguing. I think this card might be pretty good. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, there's just a lot of legendaries played in key Hearthstone decks. Not every deck, of course, but there are some meaningful legendaries. So having this kind of just chilling in hand from on occasion will give you some really efficient swing potential. Just pop 3 mana and kill your opponent's big thing. On top of that, we have quest lines, and quest lines all have quest reward legendaries. Now, this does not work as collectible legendaries. Anything with the like dragon border now counts as a legendary for these sort of effects, which means like, you know, Arcanist, Dawn Grasp and stuff off Questline Mage will count. So because so many Questline decks are guaranteed to have this big 5 mana 7/7 legendary at some point, this might be a way to help swing through that very efficiently. Now, for most of those decks, they don't really care that much about the 7/7 itself, and they may just beat you anyway, because who cares about this 4/2? But it does at least add to the consistency for a card like this. I think it's really more important for other things, you know, those Bolvar, High Lord Bolvar 4-dragon kind of plays in Paladin, right? Like, just clear that thing really affordably instead of having to like trade into the Divine Shields and such. There's all kinds of cards like that where this becomes a very efficient swing tool. So I'm actually sort of hopeful for the Grim Totem Bounty Hunter. Maybe just run one of these kind of like we used to BGH back in the day. It serves a similar sort of purpose. You could sometimes even just use it on 3-drops like Mankrik and kind of be happy that you just like cleared their 3-drop and stabilize something. You don't need to necessarily get greedy with a card like this. It's left behind to maybe take a decent trade up again with that 4 attack. So I'm hopeful for this guy. I think he's cheap enough and swingy enough that he could definitely slot into a deck here and there. Moving on to the Frightful Abomination. This is another translated name, so this may not be a final name. 5 mana 2/8 for Warlock. Battle Cry. Deal 1 damage to all enemy minions and honorable kill. Gain that minion's attack. So if you kill a board of 1/1s, you know, if you kill 7 1/1s, this would gain 7 attack, making it a 9/8 on board. That is obviously sort of the dream scenario and would be a very powerful play, no doubt. Wiping your entire opponent's board and, you know, dropping a big old threat at the same time. Now, most scenarios are not going to be that perfect. And in fact, I think you maybe on average you get like 1 or 2 honorable kills, if even that. And I'd say on average you get like, I don't know, 2 to 3 attack bonus or something, because maybe 4 if there's some like 3/1s left behind, that sort of thing, right? So I'd say very often this is like a 5/8 when it comes down, which is notably rather large. It's a pretty big threat. in that case. It doesn't have taunt or anything, which would be kind of nice to make this like a true anti-aggression card where you're both cleaning up sort of token wide boards, but also developing this really defensive body. Because it doesn't have that defensive utility, I'm a little bit more just wondering what this card achieves for decks. Again, almost kind of like the Defile card. It's attacks on this AoE, and it's not like the strongest AoE anyway. It's not a persistent AoE like Despicable Dreadlord used to be back in the day. So it's like this one turn, like really niche swing that's good against very specific board states that presents a threat on board for you, but not necessarily a defensive card. If you're playing from behind against those aggressive board states, you usually want more defensive utility. So this is kind of in a weird spot. Like maybe a mid-rangey deck runs this to just kill one or two things and develop some pressure for that like Battle Master Wind Fury on turn 6. Like that's not impossible for a card like this because the numbers are so big and the effects are so significant. It's just got that context fit problem for a 5-mana card. So I'm like sort of hopeful this figures out a home for itself. It like slots into maybe even like a Quest Lock deck is just a big body, but I kind of don't think most decks are going to figure this one out. I think they're going to find something that kind of fits their specific game plan a little better because this is kind of a mix of defense and aggression that not a lot of decks can afford to play around with. So moving on here to the Warden of Chains, a new Demon Hunter card with like the sickest looking art I've ever seen. This card looks so cool. She's got that demon in chains. That demon looks so sick back there. I want that guy. This is a 4-mana 2/6 taunt. Battle Cry. If you're holding a demon that costs 5 or more, gain 1/2. So in the decks, you'd be running this with like a big Demon Hunter deck. This would be a 3/8 for 4 mana. That's kind of like that like discard Warlocky taunt we used to have. It's big. Obviously, 8 health's a lot to work through for 4 mana. You know, this is limited to one very specific deck, which is Big Demon Hunter. There are some decent Big Demon Hunter lists out there. We even got people playing with Vandar, Big Demon Hunter, as we did, and I think Tice was as well, and a handful of others with some degree of success. Now, obviously, you don't play this with Vandar because Vandar can't have 4-mana cards in the deck, so that's a little weird. Maybe this is better than Vandar because it's consistent and Vandar is inconsistent. I personally think I'd almost rather have this than Vandar myself because this gives you that stabilization you need to get to your big demons, and you don't have this like deck limitation. You can kind of run whatever you want in the deck, which is probably on average going to end up being a better build. But it's still, this is really only good if you have those gigantic demons, and that means you're slicing off this card into a very niche scenario right from the start. And it's a deck that hasn't really proven itself. So that's a hard check on this card right away. It's like, well, yeah, if Big Demon Hunter is good, it's probably there, but what are the chances of that? Not necessarily very high. It's all fine. It's just, you know, it's gotta be Big Demon Hunter for this to make sense. That's not a particularly likely outcome, although certainly a possible one. Calar is a 4-star card. Baron Glacier is a 2-star card. Korea Fellsoul is a 3-star card. Spammy Arcanist is a 3-star card. Grim Totem Bounty Hunter is a 4-star card. Frightful Abomination is a 3-star card. Warden of Chains is a 2-star card. All right, that wraps it up here for this review. You know, so many of these cards are those ones where it's like clearly the power level on these in a vacuum is like really high. The stats are good. The effects are strong. Like, you know, they make sense in a numerical value sort of standpoint, but when we start thinking more contextually, you know, I think their likelihood to succeed is low. So high power, kind of lower likelihood to find a fit with all the like really self-directed game plans we have these days with really defined win conditions, quests, combo decks, even hyper aggro decks can't afford to like bump their mana too much. So, you know, they're kind of more mid-rangey, more slow, more control cards that all make a lot of sense. It's just, is the meta gonna sustain that? Like, can it work in this sort of meta? I don't know. I don't see how. We need Hearthstone to slow down a bit for these cards, and then they all feel insane. So, you know, if we were just strictly rating on power level and not, you know, context, these would all be really, really solid. Context, though, that's a tough one, man. They got to get played to be good. So there you go. Anyway, share your thoughts on these cards. Do you think they have homes? Do you think they'll find a way to be played? What kind of deck do they fit into? Very curious to hear those thoughts and more in the comments below. But until then, thanks much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.